Hello, welcome to the third Adigun Ade Abiodun public lecture. I'm really excited today and really happy to see everyone here and really appreciate everybody's presence. Um, to honor Dr. Adigun Ade Abiodun, we all have one form of relationship with him, either family or professional or direct or indirect mentorship, one thing or the other. And we can all attest to the impact, his contributions to humanity, his service to Nigeria, to Africa, to the global community. And so that's why we are here to honor him. Thank you so much for coming. I've already shared sort of like a guide, I'll call it a guide, like a program of events in the chat box. So we'll try and keep to that and follow it as closely as possible. So without taking much time, I'll just invite Mrs. Judith Abiodun, who is Dr. Abiodun's wife, to kind of say some welcome and then some opening remarks. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone, or good day, everyone, wherever you are in the world. I welcome you to the third Adigun Ade Abiodun public lecture hosted by the African Space Leadership Institute. I am Dr. Judith Burgess Abiodun, the wife of the late Dr. Adigun Ade Abiodun. And as you may know, my dear husband passed away earlier this year. And this Friday, he would have celebrated his 86th birthday. He was one of the co-founders of the African Space Leadership Institute. He was always engaged in planning educational programs for a new generation of space, science, and technology leaders and experts. He was always on the phone with Etim, Val, and others, right up to the very end. His interest in a wide range of scientific topics and his many intellectual pursuits never abated. His sudden passing was palpable, not only for his family, but it also sent a shockwave throughout his wide circle of professional colleagues and friends across the globe. Today, however, marks a special place in time, and we thank God for Ade's life and legacy as we are going forward with the work he loved and was strongly committed to. I want to thank Ade's colleagues at the African Space Leadership Institute for keeping his legacy alive through this public lecture series, which started 2 years ago. I extend my very special thanks to Etim Ofyong, who was a protege of my late husband and who has been a great support to me as I continue to reach out to Ade's colleagues, organize his papers and hopefully even future publications, and forge ahead with new initiatives in his honor. Ade and Etim had endless conversations about the work at the Institute and about space science in general. I can hear him now saying, Etim has so many projects in mind and he's trying to do it all at once. Thus, I see that the work at the African Space Leadership Institute continues with the same energy and commitment. And I hope that the Adigun Ade Abiodun public lecture series will continue too. I extend a very special welcome to today's speakers. First, to Ambassador Dr. Jane Bassi Adams, who is Nigeria's High Commissioner to Australia and who will give remarks. And I also welcome Dr. Brett Biddington of Biddington Research, Australia. I know Dr. Biddington from his many visits to New York and meetings at our home to discuss various scientific issues while savoring some of Ade's spicy hot pepper dishes. So, a warm welcome to you, Brett, and again, welcome to everybody here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ma. Thanks for your kind words. Dr. Abiodun, as we may know, first he established the African Space Foundation, but you're also a co-founder of several organizations. ASLI was well, I would say the last. So, in different families, the last born is usually, oftentimes, is it most favorite now. So he spent quite a lot of time trying to nurture Asley, as Ms. Abiodun has said. Val will remember from November 2021, we were meeting every Saturday. I mean, maybe we missed 2 or 3 Saturdays, maybe, but we're meeting every Saturday up till I think maybe May or June, trying to design the organization because we didn't just want to set up an organization because there are other organizations. And of course, Val, who is very experienced in organizational design, he actually teaches it in one of ASLI courses, helped in designing the organization. So maybe that's the fruit of the labor at that time, the foundation that was set. So we are really happy that this legacy has been put down or put forward, and we are really hopeful that to continue the legacy going forward. Having heard from Mrs. Abiodun, I will now invite Dr. Val Munsami. Dr. Munsami has also served Africa and the international community in several ways. I'll just mention a few. He was a former head of the South African National Space Agency. He actually led the design of the South African National Space Policy, South African National Space Strategy, and the design of the agency itself. And then he now went continental and chaired the African Union Space Working Group, which developed the African Space Policy, the African Space Strategy, and even led to the establishment of the African Space Agency, which was inaugurated earlier this year in April. Actually, we were all hoping to be there with Dr. Abiodun, but fortunately he could not make it. But Val and myself were there and sort of we have represented ASLI. Currently, Val is with the Saudi Space Agency. And like I always say in every forum, I hope we're not going to lose Val to another country or another region. So we have to find a way to bring him back to Africa. So, but while at the Saudi Space Agency, ASLI is also the platform through which is contributing and maintaining his, continue his contribution to Africa. So, I think earlier this year, he finished his tenure as the Chancellor of the International Space University in Strasbourg, France. Thank you, Val. Val has also been a mentor to me, just like Dr. Abiodun. That's why I'm really excited to see all these things about him. So, Val, over to you, please.
No, thank you, Etam. I want to start off, Judith, by just acknowledging your contribution. I think you gave us Ade. You spared him the time. You gave him the space for him to be as productive as he was. And I think without your assistance and support in the back end, we would like to truly appreciate your contribution to all of what Ade has done. So I want to start off on that front. So just a warm welcome to everybody on the call from across, I think, Africa, US, Australia. And as Etam had indicated, my name is Val Munsami, co-founder of the African Space Leadership Institute. And as Etam indicated, we spend many hours together with Ade, arguing, debating. And I think there was moments of extreme frustration as well, because things were not going the way we were conceptualized in terms of what was happening in Africa. There was politicking, things. We wanted to see Africa grow from the inside out, not from the outside in, and to build that capacity. And I think that's one of the legacies that Ade kind of left behind. Even in his book, he writes about how central the educational aspect and building the core capabilities from the inside out is. It's not about just building satellites or launch vehicles. It's about how in-depth the downstream applications should be to serve humanity. And I think that was the primary cause that Ade fought for amongst many of us. And he taught us many things along the way. the one thing I remember, I first met Ade in 2007 in Pretoria. He was, as Etam indicated, the founder of the African Space Leadership Conference. And in that year, we were hosting it in Pretoria. And that was actually the first time I met Ade. And the one thing that struck me about Ade, he remembered dates and events. You know, he would always cite, oh, I was in this year, in this place, and he will describe things as if he was still there. And it like, wow, he would go from one event to the other, swapping and, and giving us his sense of what did actually happen behind the scenes. And I think most of us remember Ade for his contribution to the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs. I think he spent 18 years until his retirement there. And the legacy he leaves is in terms of the regional centers that has been established across many continents. We've seen Brazil, Mexico, India, Jordan, Morocco, Nigeria. We also remember him for Copine. He set up this network to link scientists with educators and decision makers across Africa. And he served many, many capacities, to be quite honest. And the one thing about Ade, his foundation was built purely from a policy, strategy perspective. And he was very critical from that perspective. I think even in his book, he was highly critical, but that's essentially what a policy person does, is to critique from that aspect, from having that experience and that knowledge, which Ade truly had. But he influenced many of us. And I think we tried to encapsulate many of what Ade has been trying to teach us within the African Space Leadership Institute. We formulated this institute purely from looking at how do we capacitate the next generation of experts, or cohorts of experts, in terms of understanding what is space policy, what is strategy, how we develop the right frameworks for a sustainable space program. And this is why ASLI was essentially born, is to find that niche gap that we needed to fill in terms of making Africa shine when it comes to a space program. And we want to be truly global from that perspective. And I think that was Ade's main focus as well. How do we put Africa on the map and develop that capabilities from that perspective? So when I reflect on Ade's legacy, I'm reminded that he's always emphasized collaboration, always. And he once said that, information technologies and these tools that we use in space is essentially eroding these political boundaries and empowering nations to share knowledge and aspirations. And he wanted Africa to be there, not lagging behind. And so in many fronts, we started to work towards, setting up the African Space Program, which was launched this year, which is a huge success. We've been to the headquarters of the African Space Agency in Egypt, and I actually gave a lecture, and those three colleagues that we lost along the way, and Ade was one of the main central pillars that helped us to drive and think and reflect in terms of what was necessary for an African space policy and strategy, which is now active. And so when we look ahead and the challenges within Africa, we don't want to be merely consumers of space services, but active contributors to the global space economy. And that's a shared vision that we have with Ade. And that's why we set up the African Space Leadership Institute. And so, we have two Ambassador Jane Addams and Dr. Brett Biddington, who's going to honor us in terms of the public lecture. And I think it's a theme that's befitting, honoring Ade's memory in terms of what he aspired towards. And so we look forward to that public lecture. So in closing this brief remark, I just want to thank the Abiodun family, and especially Judith, as I indicated, for allowing us to celebrate Ade's life through this annual lecture. And from ASLI staff, Etam, myself, and the volunteers who are doing an amazing work based on what Ade and the team has established, we want to see this legacy alive, but also continuing the story that Ade left us with. So thank you for your attention, and back to you, Etam.
Thanks, Val. Thanks very much. Thanks for making out time. I know and it could be very busy at these times. Thank you. So I'll call on Ambassador John Adams to give an opening remark, but just a brief about Ambassador Adams. I can't remember the exact year, but shortly after I returned from doing some work with the African Union, I had a discussion with Dr. Abiodun. Then we were still trying to set up the African Space Foundation, and we wanted to organize a training for foreign staff of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Nigeria about space policy, space law, and space governance. So I had to go to Abuja. I went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I was introduced to Ambassador Adams. That's actually how I came in contact with her. And meeting me for the first time and receiving me like a son was something I never forgot. And since then, we've been in touch and trying to do things in terms of promoting space law, space governance in Africa. It was also very interesting. I think there was a time she was in the US when I was also trying to do my program too on space policy. So I really appreciate Ambassador Adams for her continued support. And just to say maybe like a brief bio about her, an abridged one, she's a career diplomat of about 24 years in service and currently serves as the High Commissioner of Nigeria to Australia. Before her arrival last year, December, she served as the head of North and Horn of Africa Division at the Nigeria's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, overseeing Nigeria's concerns in this region. Earlier that same year, she served as the Deputy Director in the Office of the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She has also served as the head of the America and Caribbean Affairs Division, which oversees Nigeria's affairs in both the U.S. and countries in the Caribbean, countries in the Caribbean region. And as we may know, Mrs. Judith has some strong ties with the Caribbean region. Ambassador Adams served as Child Affairs ad interim in Washington, D.C. From 2019 to 2021. She is the first female spokesperson of the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs from 2016 to 2017. Actually, my first encounter with her was at 2017. Ambassador Adams has a master's in Law of International Relations from China Foreign Affairs University, a Bachelor of Arts in French from the University of Calabar in Nigeria, and an honorary doctorate from the Global of a Day University in the US. I just decided to read an abridged form of the OCV. So without much further ado, Ambassador, over to you for your opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Etim. I want to start first by expressing my deepest condolences to the family of Adigun, and to say that may his soul rest in peace. It is actually very important that this topic has come up, and it is indeed my great pleasure to address the third session of the Adigun Abiodun public lecture, and to speak on space equities of nations in the Southern Hemisphere with focus on Africa-Australia relations. This is very important because there is the need to recognize the growing importance of the Southern Hemisphere in this new space frontier. As we are all aware, Africa in recent years is making strides in space exploration, given the recent launch of the African Space Agency in Egypt, which Val, I'll call him Val, I can't pronounce his name, Munsami.
It's Val, that's right.
Yes. You know, this initiative actually aims to propel continental collaboration and drive innovation, as well as harness space technology for sustainable development The African Space Agency establishment signals a new era for Africa, positioning it as a key player in the global space race. And I'm actually glad that for the first time, because this is my first time of getting to hear about or learn about the late Adigun, who had actually contributed a lot to the development of space science in not only Nigeria, but around the world. It is important to also note that Australia is also a significant player in the space industry with its unique geography and regulatory framework, making it an attractive destination for space launches. The Australian Space Agency is developing the country's space industry with initiatives like the mobile launch rail system developed by Southern Launch. This system enables flexible and efficient launches from various locations. I believe that there are potential benefits, apart from benefits, and enormous opportunities for collaboration between Africa and Australia in vast space exploration. These areas of mutual interest include fostering development and sharing space technology to drive innovation and economic growth. Another area is collaborating on Earth observation projects to address pressing issues like climate change, natural resource management, and disaster response. It is also important to look at the area of sharing expertise and resources to build capacity in space science and technology, particularly in Africa. However, by working together, Africa and Australia, we can leverage each other's strengths to drive innovation and economic growth, collaborate on projects that address pressing global challenges like climate change, which I had mentioned earlier, and sustainable development, as well as foster diplomatic relations and promote cooperation between our nations. In conclusion, I'd like to say that the space equities of nations in the Southern Hemisphere are an exciting and rapidly evolving area. Africa and Australia have a unique opportunity to collaborate and drive innovation in space exploration. By working together, we can unlock new opportunities, address global challenges, and promote cooperation in terms of multilateral or bilateral between our nations and continent. Well, before I say thank you, I'd like to talk to the Australian professor to let him know that there is a certain foreign policy, I believe, towards Africa when we have to look at collaboration between Africa and Nigeria. There are countries in Africa that Australia have bilateral agreements with, but certain countries, Australia do not have bilateral agreements with those countries. And the only existing cooperation between some countries in Africa and Australia is merely, if you look at it from the bilateral angle, it's merely on memorandum of understanding. And the memorandum of understanding sometimes does not really allow intensive cooperation, or will I call it increased collaboration in terms of achieving your goals. Because when you have an MOU, it doesn't really commit both people, to both countries, in terms of bilateral agreements to to do the needful. So it's important that we bring it to the platform to discuss these issues and to talk to our policymakers to see how Australia can further its cooperation, or rather bilateral agreement with not just one or two countries in Africa, but as many countries, to allow us, or to allow for actualization of policies and projects. Because for an MOU, sometimes there are no commitment, and the people, the countries can easily decide to walk away from it where there is no substantive agreement in place. Thank you so much, and I hope we have a fruitful and a more successful lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and thanks for your remarks. I believe Brett will respond to some of those things maybe during his lecture or during the interactive session. Okay, so next, since we are here to honor Dr. Abiodun, it would be good to know a bit about him. So I'm going to invite Mr. Boyega Odubi, Dr. Abiodun's cousin, close cousin, and they also worked closely together to read his citation. Because it's a virtual event, just reading may be sort of boring. So we want to also show some pictures while he's doing the reading. So I'll share the screen while I, okay, where are you? Yes. Hello, Mr. Boyega. We can't hear you, Mr. Boyega. If you're mute, it appears you're muted. Let me see.
Hey, Tim, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Okay, so I'll start.
Yeah.
Sorry. So let me share my screen again. So you can start when if you want to introduce yourself briefly, that's equally fine. Otherwise, you can just go ahead.
Okay. My name is Adigun Ade Abiodun, and I'm a cousin to the late.
We can't hear you again.
I think it's muted.
Okay, I've unmuted it.
Okay.
He was much older than I am, because but we were at the same time very close. He treated me like a son, more like a son than like a cousin. Okay. Now let me start with the citation. Adigun Ade Abiodun was born in a farming community called Araromi Abiodun, that is in the Yewa area of Ogun State in southwest Nigeria. Actually, the farming community was established by his dad and his close friends. The close friends were also my uncles. Two of them the Odubis, so they were my uncles. So he obtained his undergraduate master's and PhD in civil engineering from the University of Washington, Seattle, Washington, USA. Immediately thereafter, he returned to Nigeria and joined the Faculty of Technology of the University of Ife, Unife, Ile-Ife in Nigeria, since renamed Obafemi Awolowo University. Although he was appointed as a lecturer in civil engineering, he soon found out on his arrival at Ife that he would be placed in the Department of Agricultural Engineering. Later on, he and two other academic colleagues, Professor Ogedengbe and Professor Afonja, facilitated the establishment of the Department of Civil Engineering and its hydraulic laboratory. That was also the time the United States launched in July 1972 its first observation satellite, Landsat-1. At that time, a large part of Africa, including Nigeria, was not covered by the existing Landsat ground receiving stations. Subsequently, on behalf of Nigeria, the incumbent Vice Chancellor of UNIFE, Professor Ezekiah Oluwasanmi, invited Ade and 8 other members of the academic staff of UNIFE with education, training, and experience in those areas of national development that could benefit from the data to be acquired by Landsat-2 to contribute to a proposal that Nigeria will later submit to the U.S. National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. This was Ade's first direct involvement in space technology activity. The proposal requested NASA to acquire 8 observation data of Nigeria for use in its national development agenda. Shortly thereafter, in 1973, the United Nations Outer Space Affairs Division, UNOSAD, issued a global call for qualified candidates to apply for participation in an international course it was organizing in collaboration with CNES of France on remote sensing. Ade's application was successful. He received an invitation to participate in the first United Nations Summer School on Remote Sensing Training course that was held in Tarbes, France. I hope I pronounced that one rightly. August 21 to September 21, 1973. He was also one of the 13 participants that the United Nations sponsored to this course. At the end of the course, Ade realized he needed more knowledge. He needed more knowledge in the field of remote sensing and the broad field of space science and technology. If he were to be effective in applying it to address the several lingering development issues in Nigeria, Ade subsequently applied for and was awarded the National Research Council of Canada Postdoctoral Research Fellowship that was tenable at the Canada Centre for Remote Sensing, CCRS, in Ottawa, Canada, from December 1974 to February 1976. Just before he left Ottawa in February 76, at the end of CCRS fellowship program, he personally delivered a copy of the document he had prepared on remote sensing technology in the development of Nigeria to the Nigeria High Commissioner in Ottawa for forward transmission to the Nigerian government in Lagos. Then the capital of Nigeria was in Lagos, not in Abuja. On his return to Nigeria, he saw the opportunities to advance the knowledge and use of remote sensing technology at his university and in other Nigerian academic institutions and appropriate government establishments. Shortly after his return to Ife from Canada, he received in March 1976 an invitation from the federal government of Nigeria to serve as advisor to the Nigerian delegation to the 13th session of the United Nations Scientific, Technical, Scientific and Technical Subcommittee on the Peaceful Use of the Outer Space in Geneva, Switzerland. His contributions to that meeting led to a joint luncheon invitation from both the chief of OSAD, that is Professor Lubos Perek, and the then United Nations expert on space applications, Mr. HGS Morty. The discussion that afternoon and subsequent communication between USAID and the Nigerian government resulted in Ade's 2-year secondment to the Space Administration section of OSAD as a remote sensing specialist beginning July 24, 1977. Almost 7 months later, he attended the first meeting of COPOS as a United Nations staff. The United Nations General Assembly later decided that a second United Nations conference on the exploration and peaceful use of space, of outer space, Unispace 82, should be convened after COPOS agreed that Unispace 2 would be held from August 9th to 21, 1982, with Austria as the host country, just as it did in 1968 for this first conference, and that OSAD will similarly serve as the premier support secretariat of the conference. But by mid-1981, the incumbent chief of the Space Application Section resigned his post in order to keep the office agenda of UNSAP on track. In June 1981, on the recommendation of the two technical colleagues from East Germany and Russia, respectively, Ade Abiodun was appointed as the officer in charge of the Space Application Section. Subsequently, on November 3rd, 1981, Adigun Ade Abiodun was appointed as the United Nations expert on space applications and chief of the Space Application Section. One of his major initiatives was the establishment of regional centers for space science and technology education in the developing countries. Today, these centers are in operation in India, Morocco, Nigeria, Jordan, Brazil, Mexico, and additional center was later established in China. Another initiative he led was a satellite-based cooperative information network called COPINE. As a digression, I was in Ife when this initiative was established in Ife, and I didn't know it was done by him. We called it the rectors then in Ife. I think in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was at the university in Ife. I never knew he was the brain behind it then, but I was very familiar with it then as at 1985, 86, 87, 88 up to 1991 when I left Ife. While it received strong support from the European Space Agency and 6 West African countries, it did not receive counterpart support from the African beneficiaries. COPINE is, however, now an activity center under Nigeria's National Space Research and Development Agency, NASDA. Ade contributed to the establishment and activities of other space-related organizations, such as Regional Center for Services in Surveying, Mapping, and Remote Sensing, RCSSMRS, in Nairobi, Kenya. The center is now called Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, RCMRD. He contributed to the preparatory work that led to the establishment of the Asia Pacific Satellite Council, APSCC, served as member of the Association of Space Experts Panel on the Mitigation of Asteroids Impact. Ade retired from the services of the United Nations in September 30, 1999. Shortly after, he was appointed Senior Special Assistant to the President of Nigeria on Space Science and Technology. He led a team of 24 other Nigerian experts to develop a green paper titled Nigerian Space Program, a blueprint for scientific and technological development. The document was presented to President Olusegun Obasanjo on September 26, 2000. In January 2000, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Kofi Annan, appointed him as a member of the College of Commissioners of the United Nations Monitoring, Verification, Inspection Commission on Iraq, UNMOVIC. In 2003, with the endorsement of the African Union, Ade Abiodun was elected as chairman of the United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, COPUS. He served in this capacity from 2004 to 2006. Thereafter, throughout his career and immediately after, Ade continued to research, lecture, and publish in his chosen field of interest, and much more. In 2017, he published a book titled Nigeria's Space Journey, Understanding Its Past, Reshaping Its Future. Okay. That brings us to the end of the citation. Okay. Tim, over to you again.
Thank you, Mr. Boyega. Thanks for reading that. And one of the things you may observe is that, amongst many things, is Dr. Abiodun joined the UN just shortly before the second Unispace 2, the second UN conference on the exploration of outer space. And he retired just after the third conference, the third UN conference on the exploration of outer space, and was very active in both programs as the UN expert for the 19 years he served in the UN. And now the UN is planning the fourth edition, UN Unispace 4, the fourth UN conference on exploration of outer space. So while Dr. Abiodun is not here, his legacy, ASLI, is going to be very much actively involved in Unispace 4. And we have already lined out a series of programs, both virtual and in-person, to prepare Africa's positions and presentations at Unispace 4, which is likely going to be in 2027. In fact, this week, the UN General Assembly is meeting, and we are just waiting for a final endorsement, a final approval from heads of state about Unispace 4. So the legacy basically continues. Thank you, Mr. Boyega. Okay, so we now go to the main agenda for today, which is the public lecture, which will be delivered by Dr. Abiodun's very close friend, Dr. Brett Biddington. I asked Dr. Brett for his bio, and he sent me being a very humble man, sent me a very brief bio. So I'll read what I have, but I still want him to speak a bit more about himself, because I know there's quite a lot more that we may need to be aware of so that we can tie that up to the lecture. So Dr. Brett Biddington established a Canberra-based consultancy specialized in space and cybersecurity matters for policy and national capacity development perspectives. That was in 2010. Prior to that, he was a member of the Cisco Systems Global Space Team. And before that, he served in the Royal Australian Air Force in intelligence, security, and capability development roles. He's currently the interim CEO of a cooperative research center BID called AI for Life, which aims to investigate the impact of AI technologies on the Australian education and training system, especially classroom impacts and student learning outcomes. Dr. Brett is also an adjunct professor in the Faculty of Science at the University of New South Wales in Australia. Dr. Brett, you have the floor. Over to you. I can help. So I should share your slides, right? You said is it okay?
Yes, you wouldn't mind sharing the slides, that'd be great. And I'll just ask you to fast forward when I need to.
Okay, I just do that.
Here we go. So firstly, to Etam, thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk. Secondly, to Judith, thank you so much for your lovely words about Ade and your memory of him and the sort of work that he did. And then to the memorial that we've just had, which really explains that Ade was really a very special person in terms of Nigeria's development, not just in space, but I think more generally in science and technology. And of course, Africa has been more generally the beneficial or the beneficiary of Ade's work and passion as well. As I said in some remarks before we opened this session, I was one of the people who Ade asked for help with his book. And he and I spent many hours talking about what he really wanted to achieve in telling the Nigerian space journey and space story. Was it about, is it a story of hope? Is it a story of criticism? Is it a story of failure? Is it a story of what? And of course, it's a bit of all of those things, like all good stories are, because that's our human condition. But in the end, this is a story about optimism and striving to do better. And I was very pleased and honoured then at the end to be asked to write the foreword to his book. And I hope that I did him some modest justice in that. If we go to the next slide, please. Etam, can you go to the next slide, please?
Yeah, is it not moving?
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah, no, sorry. One back. I jumped ahead. Sorry. I was looking at my own screen, not yours. When I was asked to give this talk, I used the heading at the top, Space Equities of Nations in the Southern Hemisphere, but actually want to talk about is the equities of nations whose capital cities are south of the Tropic of Cancer. Now, why do I say that? Now, if we can go to the next slide, please. Now, there's a mistake on this slide. You can see the equator, and you can see that 13% of the world's population lives in the Southern Hemisphere, and 87% live in the north. Now, the Tropic of Cancer is the bottom of the two lines, but it's in the wrong place. It should be further to the bottom of the screen, and I only figured that out 1 hour ago when I was checking my slides. But the point I want to make, if we go now to the next slide, is that 11 countries, all of which have their capital cities north of the Tropic of Cancer, spend 99 plus pennies in every dollar that the world spends on space. You can see the OECD table to the left. Now, they're 2013 figures, but in 2020, The pie chart on the right was produced by, I think it was the North Star Research Institute. And you can see that the ratios have not changed. That North America still spends more than 50 cents in the dollar. Africa a slither at 0.7, and so on. What this tells us is that, and this is something to reflect on from Ambassador Adams' comments, the Northern Hemisphere, space is a Northern Hemispheric activity, and all of the nations south of not just the equator, but south of the Tropic of Cancer, are really in the wilderness when it comes to having much influence in space at all. If we go to the next slide, please. I then had a look at some of the comparisons between Nigeria and Australia. Our land area, Nigeria's is about 1/10 the size of Australia's. Our population is the reverse. You have 10 times more people than Australia does. GDP, more or less the same. Nigeria a little smaller than Australian. Per capita, you can see again a 1 to 10 disparity. Our economic complexity, and this is really interesting in my view, neither of us have complex economies. And this is a real problem when it comes to wanting to do high tech of anything in both Nigeria and also in Australia. And maybe there is some common cause to be had about this and common conversations. And I'll come back to that point later. And then you can see the really stark difference in the way that our population distribution is, not just between men and women, which is pretty even, but you can see that Nigeria has a very young population, tapering to a very few old people, whereas Australia's got this aging population. We're not replacing ourselves, even with immigration. And this is making very substantial demands on the public purse in terms of looking after old people like me, rather than spending money on the young and on infrastructure. So we start from some similar and some dissimilar backgrounds when it comes to thinking about what we might do together, and I'll come to that a little later. Next slide, please. So why do nations invest in space? And it seems to me there are 4 fundamental reasons: nation building, economic development, national security, and prestige. And if I put that into a Venn diagram for our 2 countries, such as I understand the Australian situation, I think, pretty well. That was what my PhD was about. Many conversations with Ade in particular and subsequent reading give a very different view of what I think are Nigeria's priorities. And you can see that prestige is of absolutely no interest to Australia, but national security is predominant. And I'll come back to that point as well. A little bit around economic development, a little bit about nation building. But in contrast, Nigeria has a much stronger view about all of those things with respect to investment in space activities. Next slide, please. Now, this is to reveal my own, if you like, prejudice, or the point from which I begin any conversation about space. From the very beginning in World War II, space has been the high ground for peace and war. And whilst that was not necessarily explicit in the late 1940s, it's becoming more and more explicit. And indeed, now that the Americans are talking about a Department of War as opposed to a Department of Defense, the language even in the last few weeks from the United States about space is very much about space warfare rather than space being for the peaceful uses and the goodness and access to people of goodwill for all good purposes. space is profoundly dual use. It's an essential component for diplomacy and warfare, and it's inextricably linked to the development of nuclear weapons. And indeed, Australia was involved in those things in the 1950s and 60s. In my view, the democratisation of space, it's been called, has not really changed this point, that three major powers, United States, China, and Russia, are really calling the shots at the national government level. And the fact that we have SpaceX's and other big companies that are now making a lot of money has not really changed the fundamental of that at all. And I worry about this because space is such a fragile and easily disturbed environment. It's of deep concern that we are struggling to behave responsibly in space. Rather, at the moment, there are terrible games of chicken being played by those three nations. And that can be very catastrophic very quickly. Next slide, please. A couple of quotes around strategy. And I know that Ambassador Adams picked up on the point of strategy, and others also mentioned how Adigun was really, really interested in what would an African space strategy look like. Basically, for me, strategy is a triangle, or can be represented by a triangle, and the points of the triangle, one point is ends, one point is ways, and one point is means. And it's about the balance that we achieve between ends, well, ways and means to achieve the ends. And of course, that is intensely political and very competitive. But the second point made by Colin Gray, a British writer, in his book Modern Strategy, is that there has not been, since we've had the space age going back to the late 1940s, there's been a very strong emphasis on engineers and technicians, and we really haven't had a great number of men and women who have thought about space from the point of view of public policy and strategy. And certainly that is the case in my country. There are very few public servants in Canberra, which is where I live, who really understand where space fits into a national security framework. We don't have a national strategy in this country. We certainly don't have a space strategy. Only a few years ago, we got our first space command within Defence, and that organisation, and even our space agency, which is also young, much younger than NASDRA, these organisations are really, really lacking deep expertise in what space is about. Somewhat ironically, the Science and Technology Committee of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, for the first 30 years, that committee was chaired by two Australians, one following the other, both from the Australian National University here in Canberra. And then Australia lost interest. We just didn't attend COPUS meetings, or we sent a junior diplomat. And these are the sort of things that I tried to address in my PhD and ask why that was the case. Okay, if we can go to the next slide, please. So a little bit more about Australia first. Firstly, we had a NASA representative here who used to say, it's really simple why NASA is interested in Australia. It's there, bare and fair. So our location, the fact that it was very radio quiet because our people are concentrated in a few cities dotted around the coast, and there's not much in the middle, as some of you may know, and fair, relatively fair democratic system of government. that related and could be seen and understood by the United States. Radio quiet, so a great review of the universe. And of course, some of you, if not all of you, will know that Australia is hosting the low frequency component of the Square Kilometre Array, a very big radio telescope project, global in nature. And the other part of the array is being built in South Africa, looking at higher frequencies. We have the Parkes Radio Telescope, which became famous because the first images of Armstrong stepping onto the moon were broadcast from there to via this dish and then to the world. And we have also the Deep Space Communication Station near Canberra, one of 3 in the world. The others are at Goldstone and Rota in Spain. And these are the dishes that talk to the very, very distant NASA probes, including still Voyagers 1 and 2, which have now left our solar system and are just heading off on a journey to deep, deep space. If we go to the next slide. Thinking about space activity in Nigeria, you set up your space agency in 1999. Ours was set up in 2018. So you can see a very big gap there. The first satellite was made by SSTL in the UK, and that was essentially an Earth observation satellite. You've had a couple of communication satellites built by China. There is now an astronaut program, which is gaining some traction. And there was an article produced and published in an Australian blog, a highly respected one, a little while ago, written by Anne Urugi Agi, and the benefits that she asserts for an astronaut program are those 3 points there: opening doors to international collaboration, showing the world that Nigeria is serious about space, and inspiring young Nigerians. And then we have the African space organisations that we've heard a little bit about already this evening. Next slide, please. So what might Nigeria and Australia do together? And I'll talk about that rather than Africa and Australia in the first instance. Now, Ade and I discussed this many times. He was really keen from his point of view, and I have always been keen from mine, to have equatorial Leo constellations for all sorts of reasons: water monitoring, land uses over change and time, and in the Australian case especially, ocean surveillance. To the north of us, if we have, we can essentially use satellites, providing we have the right sort of constellation. They would have to be radar satellites because of the cloud over the north for much of the year. They can detect both aeroplanes and surface vessels coming our way, and they would serve as a tripwire if we did the right thing. Now, some people say, well, now that we have drone technology, do we still need satellites in the same way? And the answer is yes, we do. They complement each other. It's not a one or the other. It's rather getting a balance right between the two. One of the questions that I keep on coming back to, doesn't make me very popular with some of my colleagues here in Australia, is I keep on challenging them to tell me, what are the opportunity costs of go? That narrative is very poorly developed in my too far forward. Next slide, please. Firstly, I think that Australia, maybe Nigeria too, I'll let you decide, on the S capability launch and spacecraft. Yes, there are good launch sites in Australia, except they're way, way, way far away from where most really doesn't stack up, even though these are desirable places. Just possibly for national security reasons, we might invest in some launch sites for redundancy, but that's a very expensive thing to be doing. What we really want, and I would think this is, and it goes back to Adigun's absolute passion for remote sensing and the data from remote sensing to make life better for people in Nigeria. This is exactly the point that relating to Australia as well, that it's data that we want, that we can trust and we can use to inform policy making. And if that data happens to come to us from others, I see no problem with that. I think we should avoid vanity projects. And this is where I ask the question, does one or two astronauts really serve to inspire others? Australia also, with great fanfare a couple of years ago, said, well, we're about to have the first ever Australian national who flies in space. This woman because she has UK Australian citizenship. She went through on her UK citizenship. She happens to live here. And then the Australians picked up on this, and we made her then very quickly an Australian astronaut. Now, two people who have been born in Australia have flown in space, but they both had to become American citizens to do so. Andrew Armstrong became an astronaut piloting spacecraft, and Paul Scully-Power, who was the first Australian born to fly, flew on the space shuttle as a mission specialist. So they're both still alive. One lives in the US, one here in Sydney. But these gentlemen, they're just ordinary members of the community, and they're not held up in any special regard because they went into space. It seems to me that regional and global South support for projects that advance our health and economies and those sort of outcomes. And I also think we should work really, really hard, and the ambassador picked up on this, in international forums like COPUOS to really try to bring back a conversation around trust and confidence building measures in space. There was good progress being made around 2009 to 2013 or 14, but since then the world, as we all know, has changed somewhat, not for the better necessarily, and so that progress has been lost. Opportunities for the global South, if you will, to work much more closely together than I think we do at the moment. This is where we come to the ambassador's point about the MOUs being rather empty documents because they only commit to best effort. There's no real money put on the table and no political push behind that money. And until that happens, we will remain, I think, disappointed and frustrated. Next slide. I also think that space has become exclusionary and it's an elite pastime. Think about the common language we use. It's not rocket science, it's a put-down phrase. She's got a head like a planet, meaning she's really smart and clever. What that means, of course, is that others don't have heads like planets. Therefore, they exclude themselves from even thinking that they might become part of a space industry or a space sector. And we certainly see evidence of that here in Australia, and that worries me. Military space immediately brings into play security and security clearances, particularly in this country, which is such a close relationship with the United States, especially in space matters. We host important ground stations here for the United States for its national security community. And so very quickly, what should be in the public domain actually gets locked away, and the high priests of security and the high priests of space are the ones who end up holding the cards. And as I said before, who are doing space today? Not only the major nations that I mentioned, but also some of the world's richest men, Musk and Bezos being two. Rich women are not involved. So, and that is also exclusionary and, in my view, deeply concerning. Next slide, please. So then I come to the myth of sovereign capability. I know that Ade called in his book for Nigeria to develop the ability to design, build and operate satellites, a nation-building task. There are similar calls for this in Australia. But what sense is made of this when you have a world of global supply chains? As we're seeing with Mr. Trump and his tariffs, it's backfiring on him because he simply can't make things, every single component that he wants to make in America to make America great again. He's got dependencies right around the world, or the American economy has dependencies right around the world. So what does sovereign capability mean in this context? And in the context of space, space domain awareness, SDA, that's about knowing what's happening in space. SC, space control, is being able to do something about something you don't like. Now, I cannot see Australia, even though I know there are some defence projects that are giving us some limited space control capability, ever using that capability without firstly talking to our allies and friends, including the United States. Global enterprise. And I can imagine that the United States, in some tension situation with, say, China or Russia, might ask Australia to use its space control capability when it's up and running, and it's a jamming capability, to actually try to jam a particular satellite that's doing bad things for a period of time. But I can't imagine Australia doing that all on its own initiative. It makes no sense because of the second and the third order impacts, not just on that particular satellite, but on other satellites as well. So it's a global allied enterprise from the Australian perspective, where countries like Nigeria, South Africa, Africa generally fit into this concept is really, really difficult for me to understand. And space domain awareness capabilities in Africa, I think that would be really helpful. But how they then get plugged in to other systems, European, American, who knows, maybe Chinese, maybe Russian, in some cases, straight away we run into all sorts of national security problems, as you can envisage. So I think we need to be really, really careful about this concept of what we mean by sovereign capability. And if I go to the next slide, please, I'll make this more clear. So this is a little diagram that I pulled out of some North Star research paper some years ago. Don't expect you to read all the words, but you can see on the left are tier 3 component developers, then tier 2 subsystems, integrators and operators, and down the bottom support services. If I was to colour in just those ones that Australia has capability in, it'd be basically none in tier 3, 1 or 2 in tier 2, maybe 1 or 2 in tier 1. And, you know, what I'm saying is it's very thin. Now, that's the Australian situation. I think it wouldn't be too much different if you were to do the same in Nigeria or indeed in Africa as a whole. And so, again, we have to think really carefully about what we mean by sovereign capability given the ubiquity of global supply chains. Next slide. This is, I think, my second last slide, and it's just to say that one area where I think there might be opportunity for cooperation is in the space of education. I declare my interest here. I've been associated with this Space Science Centre in Victoria for about 15 years. I chaired their advisory board. These guys have gone to a Mars landscape, and students come here having been prepared in their schools by their classroom teachers. They come to this centre and then they do geology, but on a Martian surface. It's an extremely popular and effective program. The actual program has been gifted to schools in South Australia, Western Australia, and Connecticut in the US. And I see that there's absolutely no reason why this program would not be gifted to schools or education departments in other parts of the world, including Africa, if there is interest. And of course, next week is the International Astronautical Congress being held in Sydney. I'm not sure whether there will be any delegates from Nigeria. In 2017, the same Congress was held in Adelaide, and I organised that conference on behalf of the Space Industry Association of Australia. We had two. We have quite a few coming in from South Africa, as we did in 2017 to Adelaide, but I'm not aware of any other African representatives coming to the Congress. Now, this is the world's nominally largest sort of gathering of the space community, but it seems that no matter how much we aspire to do things better in the global south, it doesn't really happen. There are very few people coming from any of the nations that exist in South America, for example. So Africa is not alone in this. Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Bolivia, Uruguay, Paraguay, they're just not involved. If I go to the next slide, please. And I'll open up to questions, just with the point that I hope this has promoted and provoked some thoughts and some questions and some, we'll see how we go with Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Biddington. Thanks for the excellent lecture. I actually have some questions, but let me reserve that. When you mentioned VSEC, I remember, it rang a bell because around 2000, actually I had to check my emails, 2009, 2010, there was a very strong collaboration between VSEC.
Okay, so you froze up. You froze, so you've missed a bit of text.
Oh, okay, sorry.
You're
I was talking about VSEC when you mentioned VSEC. Around 2009, 2010, there was strong collaboration between VSEC and the regional center in Nigeria, that's AXTI. I had to check my mail. There used to be a lady there called Naomi Matters.
Naomi Mathers, she's now left.
Okay, so she was the contact person that was forging that collaboration. So I don't know how much of that is still going on now, but I'm hoping maybe I'll have to check with my colleagues to see if there's nothing there. We should see how we can revive that collaboration.
Well, please contact me. I look after their external relationships, and we're happy to try to bring something back together. And VSEC will be at the conference in Sydney. Sydney next week. We can try to get them in touch, but certainly contact VSEC through me and I'll take it forward.
Okay. So I open the floor for comments and questions. I see Ambassador Lukomi's hand up. Ambassador, you could introduce yourself and make your comment or question.
Well, thank you very much. I must say congratulations to Dr. Brett, and I had to quickly also raise up my hands. I can see Mrs. Abiodun here. I want to say thank you for what you've done, what you did with your husband, and of course, I want to say thank you for everybody. I happened to I met Dr. Abiodun Adigun in New York when I served in the permission of Nigeria to the UN between 86 and 89. He was the one in charge of the outer space program. Subsequently, our path crossed again when I was in Vienna in Australia. He comes in regularly for these meetings for couples, and Vienna, I was the one that was taking care, and I attended those meetings. But I was also High Commissioner of Nigeria to Australia. I served between 2011 and 2015, and I was closely involved with Dr. Abiodun Adigun. And when he launched his book, when I finished in Nigeria, I was still also with him too as well. Now, I'll ask my two questions, but let me make this point. When I had also reached out when I was in Vienna, the 50th anniversary of Man in Space was held. Dr. Brett, I think you were there. I can't remember if Mrs. Abiodun was also with us at that period. I was the acting High Commissioner. Corpus was there. I can see SD Umar, Ambassador Umar in here. He's also there. And they asked all countries to bring in their programs in terms of that. And I remembered very well, China and others came. Even China showed us where they're going to land in outer space. Don't let me go to whatever we prepare. We didn't do justice to ourselves because Nigeria has done a lot in the area of space. And I was closely involved with Dr. Abiodun, and I said, why is this? Now, I think the point we should continue to emphasize is towards your end. One, the question of effectiveness of space, the use of space in the area of health, in the area of technology, and all of that. Link to a friend of mine. We met in church. You know, Nigerians, we're always meeting in church. And people said, are you sure that we'll have church in space? I said, wait a minute. When we get to space, we'll see whether we have church in space or not. Let us deal with it in here first. And he said, I said, what of NASA? He said, what is NASA doing? I said, NASA is about just a space center. I said, we have a satellite, in terms of orbit, general one in respect of agriculture. He said, I don't know anything about it. He said, what are they telling us? What are they doing? Of what use? Which underscores the importance of outfits like NASDAQ coming out there to be able to say, look, this is what we are doing. And this. I know that they also have something, a limited liability company, in terms of what exactly they can produce. I was in Nairobi, I remember, when Professor Ison Turner came in respect of the Nigerian satellite communication. So I find that there's a vacuum in that area. And I want us to see what we can do in terms of the outcome of this event, underscore that the need for Nigeria and Africa to underscore the importance of space. I'm happy you've clarified the issue. It's binary. The question of drones cannot replace. Secondly, sir, I was also involved in terms of young people for space in Vienna. And I was glad when you showed me the number of people that visited VSEC. And it was one of the places which I think I wanted to visit when I was in Australia. As I'm in Nigeria, how many of our universities have programs that can encourage young people to look into the area of space? I know the University of Lagos, because when we're launching Dr. Adigun's book, there's somebody in geography department. How many? We need to look at how can we do it. You said 3,000 people? 30,000 students came? How many have visited NASDAQ? I know I saw a program in which they did that, but we need to do more. Finally, Afe Babalola University in Nigeria, when I was Director General Nasima, after my service in the foreign service, I was recruited and I scaled defense to the private sector. The private sector in Nigeria is not even talking about space. Don't let us say that area. Unfortunately, they're supposed to. The telecom use space. But I know Afe Babalola University has a planetarium in Ekiti. Ado Ekiti. And I want to say that and suggest that there is need for closer link between Afe Babalola so that a lot of young students can be encouraged in this area. Nigeria has done so much in this particular area. And I'm telling you, if you take a census of how many people are aware of what we've done, very few people. Very few people. You have enough in your lecture. Let me at this point say thank you very much for what you've done. And I can see Mrs. Abiodun smiling. I decided to put my, to say thank you, man. Thumbs up to you. Your husband was great. He did a great thing for Nigeria. And the fitting tribute is to continue what can be done. I know University of Ife. So let us see what we can do with young people in the universities themselves. I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I'm not. If Ajijola is here on this call, it was somebody who we also work with, especially when we were launching Dr. Abiodun's book. I also want to say thank you to the ambassador, High Commissioner in Canberra. Lovely place. I miss Canberra, honestly speaking. You can imagine Canberra 260,000 and now live in a city of over 20 million people. You see, I want to see. And I also want to say Ambassador Onimola is also here. He worked closely also with us. In fact, those of us, it is now 2:31 p.m. in Nigeria. I was been trying to join, and I had to call the High Commissioner. I said, what is happening? I know Australia used to suffer from tyranny of distance, but now you are enjoying the advantage of adjacency, and you are just next down to us. Thank God for what we are doing. I'm just on this with my phone. Can you imagine? That is space.
Thanks, Ade.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Your Excellency. Brett, do you want to respond to that, or?
Look, I don't know that there were too many questions in what the ambassador had to say. It was more thanking and giving us some very good advice. Certainly, I reiterate my offer that if there is internet, I can be contacted by LinkedIn or just ask Etam and he can give you my email. There's nothing special about that. And I think I said this in my talk, we just have not many people in this country who have got space policy experience. To see Sputnik. Secondly, I was as an exchange and what was Pad 39, where the Apollo program and Apollo 11 launched from. White television set. An uptick when the shuttle came along, then there were disasters with the shuttles being lost, and again, it just fell off the cliff of public interest. I certainly lost interest. Space stuff was all about. So I then began to think about, well, what's Australia's role in all this? ultimately I wrote that in a PhD. And from now, you don't set up a space agency for jobs and growth. You set up a space agency to do stuff in space. And if it happens to lead to jobs and growth, that's great. In this country is all about assertion. You must do space to have sovereign capability. You must do space to be a self-respecting OECD nation. You from an Australian government point of view, the real here he is. We're back again, Etta.
Sorry, my internet has been misbehaving. I'm sorry about that. Yes, Dr. Musame, I was actually going to call you because Dr. Bed mentioned something about SKA, and I know you were very instrumental to developing South Africa's astronomy program and contributed to the SKA. So, Dr. Musame?
Adigun Ade. At one point in time, Prof. Biddington referenced the square kilometre array, and we were having an African leadership conference. I think it was in Nairobi, and I was responsible for it from the ministry perspective, and I was giving a presentation on the SKA. And Ade, at the end of the we're talking about the global south, because a lot of the collaborations is not among African countries, is with countries outside of Africa. And that's a symptomatic problem. If we're talking about an African space program, one of the examples, the SKA is one where we have 9 African countries working with Australia, the Square Kilometre Array. And there's another initiative, which was the Digital Earth Africa, which actually started with the Council for Geosciences. I worked with Stuart Munchen. The initiative had gone elsewhere in the world, like myself, because there's not enough commitment. And I think symptomatic to what you're saying is happening in Australia. And I see now even the UK Space Agency is kind of toning down and is absorbed into the ministry. So, the long-term commitment for space doesn't the reality. As you said, it's short-term outcome, KPIs in terms of jobs, but the long vision and focus is completely.
And look, if I may quickly, I've now pulled up the chat. Juliet Igbo, you asked a question about oceanography and marine research, possible research opportunities. The answer is yes. I can put you in touch with an oceanographer colleague of mine at Curtin University in Perth in Western Australia, and Paul Scully-Power, the first Australian to fly in space. I mentioned his name. He actually joined the Royal Australian Navy as an oceanographer, and one of the reasons that he flew in space was to test a hypothesis that there was actually circulation in the North Indian Ocean, which others had not recognised, but he was able to demonstrate from space that that happens. So again, if you would like me to put you in touch with my contact in Curtin, who's an oceanographer, I can. I'm just running down and looking at my question relates to our disaster response. The answer is, again, that there are many people looking at disaster response. This country has two main sorts of problems. One is flood and one is fire. Leaving aside drought and climate change, those things that displace people rapidly. Interests, and I'll find the right people that were in the chat. Etum, back to you.
Yeah, Mr. Banboye Olusanjo, your hand is up.
I'm not seeing.
Hello.
Yeah, Mr. Banboye Olusanjo.
Yes. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you now.
We can hear you.
Okay, Dr. Bradford. And if you look at the book, the first part of it was telling us how do we encourage young Nigerians to show and I think to sit down in Nigeria. Mathematics and physics. I don't think we can get interest in space technology. That's number one. The second one is space technology now has been linked and health implications of it. So I don't know how we can do this among our politicians. Those the ambassadors that are here who are also linked them on the application of this technology for economic, health, and other developmental issues. That's just my comment. Dr. Brett, thank you very, very much, and I was happy you are part of the people who made suggestions to Dr. Abiodun's talk.
It's not space science matters, but what matters more to that centre is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That's what it really teaches through the vector or through the lens of the space sciences.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Keep going. We can hear you.
And thank you Thank you, Dr. Brett, for the thank you to